Hey guys, Connor Richards of PokerNews here in Las Vegas, and this is Life Outside Poker. My guest for this episode is statistician Nate Silver, whose new book, On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything, makes the case for taking risks in life. We talked about Nate's research for the book, which included interviews with people like Sam Bankman-Fried, and we also talked about how Nate seems to have been drawn to numbers his whole life. We also had a chance to talk about the presidential election, but we filmed this interview back in June before President Biden dropped out of the race. Let's get into it. All right, Nate. Well, this interview is a real honor for me because,
thank you, Connor.
In addition to being a big poker fan, I come from a journalism background. I was in journalism before poker, and my degree is actually in data journalism.
Oh, perfect.
When I got into journalism, it was like right around the 2016 election, so a time you're familiar with. So many things that I want to talk to you about, and we'll get into it all, hopefully. But let's go back to the beginning, because is it true that your fascination with numbers and your aptitude for it goes back to like when you were 6 years old?
Yeah, for sure. I was like, it first manifested itself in baseball. So when I was 6 in 1984, the Detroit Tigers were the best team in baseball, won the World Series, got off like a 35-5 start, lots of numbers and data in baseball. But yeah, probably just always really good at math at an early age, kind of checking some of those boxes and stereotypes for sure.
That's so interesting that, you know, the 1984 World Series and that kind of really solidified your interest in this. Do you think your life would be different if that event didn't happen?
I feel like in terms of poker, at least, poker feels really robust for me. There are like a lot of things I like about poker, right? I mean, it's partly the math of it, but also like I'm a fairly competitive person. I guess I'm kind of, I don't think I'm super risk-taking, but relative to a lot of people, I don't mind taking risk, right? And I feel like I just kind of see the world in common with a lot of poker players. So this feels like really over-determined for me. But look, life is like very contingent in a lot of ways also. I mean, kind of in some ways, getting into politics in FiveThirtyEight was more of an accident. It actually was partly inspired by poker. So I had a consulting job out of college that I was kind of underachieving and bored at, right? But this is, I graduated from college in 2000. So the moneymaker boom is happening beginning in 2003. I had a friend who invited me at my workplace to like, hey, let's go play like a home game. I had played a little bit kind of in summers from college, like teaching like debate camp and things like that. But I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like actually try to like, because I'm competitive, get pretty good. So you're playing like Yahoo Poker. You're like, this sucks. It's free. There's no incentive to like actually learn how to play well when there's no real money at stake, right? So I see some offer from like Pacific Poker, to date myself a little bit, where you get $25 for free or with some strings attached. You have to play through it, I think, like that, right? And then, you know, kind of ran it up and busted it and then deposited $100 of like real money. And I think ever since then I've been up lifetime at poker. I'm sure I ran like super well. I like literally had like a color-coded like hand chart that I printed out at Kinko's, right? Not sophisticated at all. It's just like, what's the all-in equity of each hand against every other hand, and like, but look, I mean, there was a lot of really soft games back then, and before long, you learn a few things. I played Limit Hold'em back then mostly. I played a lot of Limit Hold'em 6 max, and kind of evolved into like a fairly loose aggressive strategy that I think now would be considered correct. I mean, Limit Hold'em, the equities, right? You can't really push people off hands, so you're doing a lot of like very tactical value betting and bluffing, and like it's a very aggressive game but played optimally. But the strategy then was like, oh, you only want to play your premium hands and you don't want to put too many bets in. So I think kind of, I don't know, my degen lag style like actually was unintentionally kind of GTO when you learn through trial and error, and made a decent living playing kind of, you know, mid-high stakes online Limit Hold'em for a couple of years. And then I exited before Black Friday, but 2006, you had the UIGEA pass that like, so party poker, which is where I made all my money. It was like up lifetime party poker, down everywhere else, right? That shut off to Americans. Limit Hold'em was like drying up in general. And like, I don't know, I think kind of the lifestyle of being kind of like unmoored and playing online poker. I also had like the baseball prospectus thing going on, but like the lifestyle wears on you after a period of a couple of years, I think. So tilty, burned out. So quit and wound up starting FiveThirtyEight. But I was inspired in part by the UIGEA passing and being really mad at Congress for like passing this law that compromised my livelihood. I got really into the 2006 midterms that year. I wanted to see the people who passed the bill ejected from office. And in fact, one of them was Jim Leach, who was a major sponsor, lost to some political science professor at University of Iowa State or something. Poker players helped to fund that campaign. And then 2008, you start, I don't know what you'd call it, a very interesting period in American politics.
Yeah.
The start of that period with the rise of Obama. I was living in Chicago at the time. It's like, who is this guy from University of Chicago Law School? What's he trying to do, right? But you're kind of there for the start of it. And that was, I think, a very exciting time in American politics where at the time I was relatively young people getting more involved in politics. Since then, politics has taken a kind of a bunch of roller coaster turns, but it was like kind of having my livelihood compromised and having this forced interest in the political system that kind of led to the other path, I guess.
And you mentioned that 2008 was a really interesting political time. Do you see that as kind of a precursor to 2016 or where we are now with Trump and how partisan everything is?
Yeah, I mean, look, there is a long-standing trend toward greater partisanship in the United States. In some ways, Obama tried to defy that, right? In some ways also, though, kind of Trump's candidacy was a backlash to Obama. I mean, partly there's a racial component, I think. Partly there's kind of like a class component where kind of now all the college-educated people, expert class are all Democrats and kind of the working class are more Republican. That's a reversal from traditional political trends. Look, America's a complicated country. To elect presidents as different as Obama and Trump back to back is what you sometimes get in a democracy. As someone who likes democracy, I think part of that is understanding you don't always get what you want, right? And when everyone in America has had some, I don't think there are very many crossover Obama-Trump fans or Trump-Biden fans exactly. Look, in some ways, I think also I've gotten a little bit more disillusioned and burned out on politics myself. If you kind of come out in the Obama years, it's kind of this, fairy tale story where the first black president, obviously, again, a president where if you're kind of more nerdy or intellectual, he like literally was at University of Chicago where I went to, right? I mean, that was very cool to see, regardless of Obama's politics per se. It's like kind of, very different when you're used to like these kind of older kind of white guy politicians, basically, right? But, it was not the new normal. I mean, there's reversion to the mean, something poker players understand is like, it's going well for some period of time and then the variance hits and it levels out.
And have you said that you're actually not going to be doing any polling for this election this year?
No, we're going to have, I don't do polling myself, but I am, we will have, by the time you read this or listen to this, which is post-data from when we're taping it, there will be an election model for paid subscribers at my newsletter, Silver Bulletin. I'm also doing, full disclosure, some consulting work for financial firms in the elections. So I don't know. I mean, look, I'm burned out on politics in certain ways, not like the forecasting part of it, right? The forecasting part of it, it's an interesting problem, how you take the polls and translate that into probabilities, right? That's a more poker-like problem. So that part, I love the conversations I have with like my consulting client or whatever else, right? But the kind of public part of it, I don't really enjoy, right? Yeah. People tag lots of misperceptions on you. This is unflattering. I think a lot of politics fans are kind of nutty in an election year. I think it's like not something that kind of triggers a more level-headed part of people exactly. And so you kind of become part of the story, which as a journalist, you never want to be part of the story. So, I mean, my view is like, look, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to make money for it. I'm not giving this away for free. You can buy a subscription, which I think provides a lot of value, or I can make money. The model is mine, but the consulting and special projects kind of thing. So it's like, if it's something which is no longer something I find pleasurable, I don't find poker pleasurable, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm really excited to be out here at the World Series when we're taking this and play, right? I'm not really excited anymore about election forecasting. I'll do it if I make enough money from it because I'm good at it and I have things to say. But it's like not where my passion is at this point in my life.
So you mentioned that we're filming this now and it'll be a few weeks before this interview airs. So of course things are going to change heading into the election, but what sort of forecasting do you have for this year's presidential election?
I mean, again, I'm always afraid, just for reference's sake, we're taping this in early mid-June. What's the actual date?
Yeah, June 8th today.
June 8th. You get lost a little bit. You get kind of on Vegas time. Right?
Yeah, no doubt.
As of June 8th, I mean, I think it's safe to assume that it's a very close election. I think, look, Trump is ahead right now in the polls in the swing states. Not by a lot, but by a little bit. The counter to that is that traditionally incumbents like Biden win more often than not. Also, we have an economy that's improved, although it has problems with high prices and things like that. So if you kind of didn't know what the polls said, you'd probably assume, and Biden won last time, by the way, he won the same matchup 4 years ago. If you didn't know what the polls said, you'd assume Biden was favored. If you look at the polls now, Trump would probably win today. And the question is, how do you kind of reconcile that prior, to use the kind of fancy term, with the updated information you have? And you're probably somewhere in the ballpark of 50-50. I mean, for posterity's sake, if you gave me, if I got a free Caesar's Rewards free bet today and had to bet on one candidate, I mean, I suppose I'd rather bet on Trump. He's had a pretty durable lead in the polls. But, I think poker players listening to this understand that, like, what we call a coin flip, Jacks versus Ace King is not actually a coin flip. Jacks actually wins like 56%, right? So maybe Trump's the Jacks and Biden's the Ace King. Biden has some pretty good outs, I think, including a polling error, including, debates and so forth. But just like Jacks are kind of like in the lead before the flop is dealt, like kind of Trump's kind of in the lead right now based on the polling.
Yeah, you mentioned poker players especially are familiar with things like flips and how those equities run close, as it were. So thinking back to the 2016 election, I think poker players can understand. I think you gave like Trump 28% chance to win.
28, 29, depending on which version of the Monty you looked at, yeah.
So poker players can understand that a 70-30 like that can go either way, and it doesn't mean that you were wrong, as it were. The
flush draw hit. But more than that, like, I guess I have a chip on my shoulder about this, but like, we were long Trump relative to the market. So to me, our forecast was substantially plus EV, plus expected value. If the consensus is 15% and you're at 30 or 29, whatever, then you were right. In the gambler's mentality, right, you were kind of right and should be credited for that, because I don't think in terms of binaries exactly. And also, like, I think it's also different if the market were 1% and we said 2%, then it's different, right? But like 30% things happen a lot. A good Major League Baseball player with a 290 batting average is going to get paid pretty well. The flush draw or open-ender comes in that 29, 30, 35% range in poker after the flop. So I don't know. To me, I know, I'm used to dealing with a lifetime of variance, I guess.
And you mentioned that, you were happy with your forecasting. You thought it was pretty accurate. But again, just on social media and things like Twitter, people just react to it in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
How do you get past that? Do you think it's, like data literacy, or just the problem with social media, if it's just so easy to kind of attack something?
I think it's more the latter. I mean, look, I think people understand probabilities pretty intuitively well when it comes to things where they have kind of skin in the game, right? If you're told, you have a 30% chance of recurrence of cancer if you don't have this surgery, I think people understand pretty well what that might mean, for example. I think they understand that if there's a 30% chance of your flight being late, you better call ahead to whatever meeting you have and make contingency plans. I think people understand that when they have skin in the game. No, I think it's mostly that kind of politics makes people crazy. And I don't know. Look, I think on social media, I'm not trying to be everybody's favorite person. I'm trying to write for the people that I respect and I think understand what I do. I think that's kind of like clearer now that like I have a subscriber newsletter where you're making money from the people who appreciate what you do. And I think, to use another poker term, it's okay to be like a little bit polarizing. You know what I mean? I think if you're a person who is a adult and you developed a way of looking at the world and have different interests, then you don't have to be friends with all 8 billion people in the world, right? If you have a handful of circle of close friends and a handful of more people who support your work, I mean, that's a pretty good life, I think, really. And also kind of engage with people more on your own terms, right? They know what they're getting. I know what I'm getting. It's a lot more kind of like self-selection. I think people make big mistakes trying to please too many people instead of being themselves and differentiating.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about your poker career, especially after the online poker basically went down in the U.S. But before that, I do just want to go back to something. You said that you were in high school debate.
Oh, yeah.
Debate was a huge part of my life. Honestly, that was like a catalyst moment for me. I joined my senior year of high school. I did a bit in college as well. But that's kind of where, I don't know, school clicked for me, I would say, and just a really pivotal point. Did it have that effect on you?
No, for basically my last 2 years of high school, I was basically like a traveling debate team.
Yeah.
Right? We would go and go to Wake Forest or go to the Chicago suburbs of Michigan. So and we were excused from school every Friday and some Thursdays and things like that. And so that was basically my life. And there is this weird, uncanny resemblance between debate tournaments and poker tournaments,
Thank you. Yes. I see a ton of I say all the time that there's a lot of parallels between poker and debate, and kind of tickles the same part of the brain. So
for sure. And the competitiveness, right? You kind of get into the out routes, making the money. It's kind of very similar feelings, and you kind of see the same people around, and you're like, oh, I guess we're kind of friends just because we travel together all the time, right? And but no, I am admittedly a very competitive person. I think kind of part of what the book is about too is who are these people where you have this intersection of being really analytical on the one hand and really competitive on the other hand? Because sometimes analytical people can be actuaries and kind of risk averse, but not poker players. I mean, poker players are all, you have to be kind of not cutthroat. That's a different thing. I don't think life's a zero sum game, but you have to be competitive to kind of get back on your feet in an environment where in tournaments, it's usually pure pain, right? You usually lose. Even when you make a deep run, you're often upset about not winning, and getting ousted at some point along the way of the deep run. And so, but debate kind of is also very analytical and very competitive. And so it's a very natural, I think, outflow from that.
Yeah, I totally see parallels between those. So yeah, that's super interesting. And let's talk more about risk aversion, because this is a big topic for you. You're kind of an expert in this area, and you recently wrote a really good Substack post. I think it was called "Don't Be a Nit."
Oh yeah,
and it was after you had, I think, bagged one of the chip leads in an event. I think it was the 5K event that you went deep in.
The 5K, yeah.
You actually had a brutal exit, so we can talk about that as well in a minute. But break down that post and why poker players should not be risk averse and shouldn't be nits.
Because to win a poker tournament, you have to, just by definition, you have to it's not going to be a smooth ride upward, right? You can't turn down the 55, 45 slots or a spot when early on day 2 of the 5K, I'm in a spot where I have pocket eights raised on the button. I get 3-bet by the somewhat crazy, I would say, big blind, right? And the flop is 9-7-7. Bet call. The turn is a 4, putting the flush draw out, right? He basically effectively shoves. I have a little bit of chips behind, but de facto shove. And if you run that through a solver, I'm not sure this guy's playing like a solver. I think I probably have a little bit more equity than the solver says, right? But let's say we're playing blind and he's playing perfectly and I'm playing perfectly. You're going to win only about 40% of the time in that spot. However, because you're getting, 2-1 from the pot, then you have to take that. It's a big mistake not to take that, even though 60% of the time you're going to bust your tournament. Now, this player might be more like 50-50, but you're still going to bust a lot. This tournament that I built up a big stack in and was very excited about, right? And you will not win a tournament if you turn down spots. We have a 6 big blind edge or whatever you have according to the solver, right? You can't consistently pass those up. Maybe literally on day 1 of the main event, because it is such a long tournament and it's so soft. And that's the exception to many rules in poker is day 1, day 2, a soft main event table. But you have to you have to take the plus EV flips. The 50-50 flips, Maybe you want to go out and get a steak dinner. Maybe you want to fade the variance, maybe give you an edge. Okay, but the 55, 45s and up, you have to take. And don't be a nit. Poker players know the term nit. I love the term nit. The kind of combination of like risk aversion and cheapness and neuroticism is a personality type you encounter in everyday life, I think. So I'm trying to like export nit to the non-poker masses, basically.
So how are some ways in life that people can not be nits?
Look, I think having a higher reserve, that's a nerdy way to put it. I think being able to like quit a situation that's not working out well for you. I mean, Annie Duke wrote a good book about this a couple of years ago called Quit, right? Which cites some data that like, on average, when people are in a close decision to switch their jobs, they're happier when they switch, right? They're probably happier when they get out of an unhappy relationship or marriage. They're probably happier when they move or pick up a new hobby, right? It's kind of really easy to get kind of tracked in the day-to-day of some not terrible but vicious cycle, right? And I think taking more risk with your career, right? I mean, I think financially, if you're not investing in equities, the stock market meaning, instead of like just sitting on cash, I mean, you're giving up a lot of income over the long term. And then there are things where it's like, obviously when we had COVID and people like have like very different lifestyle choices, and I respect that, right? Like that's more of a personal choice. But like, I think in general, people are wired to be pretty risk averse. Now it's very dangerous to like say this on a podcast that poker players will listen to, because like there is the other direction. Yeah. There is the other direction. And you see that in the poker world, both in the tables and also like in lifestyle choices that people make, right? So, maybe don't listen to this if you're a poker player. But for the most people, our evolutionary instincts are wired from having like a subsistence existence for most of our lives, right? Where like your risk of ruin is often very high if there's like a bad harvest or if you get an illness, there may not be any cure or medication for it. And people who are willing to take calculated, quote unquote, rational, analytically driven risks are often very successful. And I think the average person probably could stand to be like a little bit less of a nit.
Yeah. And speaking of risk, so by the time this episode comes out, you'll have this book out, which is On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything. Is this your second book? How many books have you written?
Second book, yeah.
Second book. And so just a little blurb from this. So in this book, you investigate the river, the community of like-minded people whose mastery of risk allows them to shape and dominate so much of modern life. And so you talk about people from various industries, crypto, poker, hedge fund, people like Doyle Brunson, Sam Bankman-Fried, Sam Altman. Here's another blurb. Most of us don't have traits commonly found in the river. High tolerance for risk, appreciation of uncertainty, affinity for numbers, paired with an instinctive distrust of conventional wisdom and a competitive drive so intense it can border on irrational. So what do you think, what did you learn writing this book? What can we learn from these people?
I mean, part of what I learned is that this is a common personality type. So like literally the first investigation, so to speak, I did for the book was I went to the Seminole Hard Rock in whatever it is, Hollywood, Florida.
I was just down there, yeah.
Yeah, the first major tournament after we were technically still in the pandemic, but the first big comeback post-COVID for poker, where they have like the plexiglass dividers, and people are, at that point, still wearing masks somewhat half-assedly, but it was a record-setting tournament for the World Poker Tour. And like, okay, there's something here that's happening, right? Because objectively speaking, a casino in Florida, not to demean Florida, right? But like a casino is not the most COVID safe environment. A poker tournament is closed quarters where you're in closed quarters with many people breathing around you for hours and hours and hours on end. And yet you get like a record audience, and it's like, there are these people that are in what I call the river that are like, fuck this, I have to live my life and I have to take risks and I'm not going to sit in my apartment all day anymore. But then you realize that this personality type of like the kind of very competitive, good with numbers, distrustful of conventional wisdom. That's like describes like the median poker player, but what I saw that replicated, like that describes a lot of the mindset of Silicon Valley too, right? Mm-hmm. it describes a mindset of some of the more quantitative hedge funds too. It describes the mindset of, to some extent, even people like this community called effective altruism, which is where they're trying to apply analytics for good, more or less. It's a whole complicated detour. To some extent, in like sports analytics, I mean, Moneyball kind of comes a little bit out of that. We're competitive, we're analytical, and we don't trust the conventional wisdom, right? And so you see these commonalities and the overlap. Like when I come back out here for take this in June, right? In July, I love July at the World Series because it's like both the main event and NBA Summer League. So I have this intersection of like poker people and basketball people. I'm a big NBA fan in my life, and they kind of overlap quite a bit, actually, right? The personality types are not that dissimilar, and so it is a real community of people that I think they may not identify as a community, and they're the people that are, in some sense, like kind of literally getting rich and kind of winning. I mean, look, Las Vegas as an industry is doing quite well, right? Wall Street's doing quite well still. Silicon Valley is doing quite well, and these are all industries that understand risk. And so, so part of the pitch of the book is that if you're not somebody who likes these people, and there are lots of things that are dislikable about Silicon Valley VCs and founders, and about Wall Street, and about Vegas, frankly, right, and the casino industry, you at least are going to get a much better understanding of how they think and kind of what makes them tick and where their irrationalities are too. Because like in the blurb, it's people sometimes who are like so insanely competitive where it's actually in some sense not about money or not about some EV maximization, right? It's about the desire to prove people wrong. It's about having a chip on your shoulder and having revenge a lot of the time that can cause people to over-index a lot on being competitive once they've already won, right? Like Elon Musk already won the lottery, right? Out of 8 billion people in the world, or out of how many 50 billion people ever exist, he became the single richest one, right? And he's still taking insane risk with lots and lots of downside protection if he fails, obviously. But like understanding that personality type, I think if you don't like these people, or like me, you think like, okay, they do some good, they should probably be subject to some constraints and regulation. I think this is kind of like an inside tour of like how people in this world think, which I can give because I'm one of them. Like I recognize myself in a lot of these people. And so I'm trying to kind of translate that for a wider audience, basically.
So there's obviously a lot of risk with being high risk. And so the Sam Bankman-Fried case study specifically, FTX was massive and ended up basically blowing up. What are the downsides to this way of living, and how can kind of that sort of competitiveness go wrong?
I mean, there are a lot of lessons from SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried. He occupies like 3 chapters in the book. I talked to him in the Bahamas like 4 days before he was arrested. I talked to him before and after, so we kind of get like these different time capsules. I mean, look, one lesson with Sam is that he was entrusted by too many people in his orbit, despite like, I think not actually being a very good risk taker, right? I mean, you talk to people that used to work with him and they're like, yeah, he kind of is somebody who would have kind of a first good approximation or estimate, which is an important skill. I mean, in poker, approximation is important. But then we get very dug in and very stubborn and then start to rationalize it and not adjust very well to new evidence. He obviously has like an insane tolerance for risk, be willing to take like coin flips for infinity money, kind of almost literally, is what he told Carolyn Ellison. I think that's literally true. I think when he says like, I'd be willing to like gamble the entire fate of the world if we could double utility in the world, right, for a 50-50 coin flip or 50-149, he would literally have taken it, I think. But like, look, if you play poker or you're involved in this kind of river world more broadly, you see the kind of hotshot kid who wins 2 or 3 tournaments in a year-long span, right, and now is playing all the high roller tournaments and talks a big game and maybe has some like flaws in his lifestyle or his game. Like just you watch, man, he's going to come down to earth, and 9 times out of 10, then the sun run ends, and they do. And I think people in the poker world would have had more skepticism over SBF. We're very used to this kind of like personality type of this kind of. I mean, I'm not going to demean him, but like in his like court hearing, he said, I'm, on the autism spectrum. That's why I deserve more accommodations. Like we use like this kind of certain type of nerd who talks a big game and plays in, I think, to the image. I mean, he was very conscious of the image that he was cultivating, of the disheveled curly hair and kind of, going on stage with Bill Clinton or something in very casual wardrobe. I mean, that was all like deliberately catered based on the sources for my book to kind of trigger Silicon Valley's buttons and stereotypes. You're like, oh, this guy must be so authentic because he's dressed like this, right? He's not trying to, so he's a very good con man in lots of ways. And I think some of the treatment that treats him as like kind of like a mad genius. I think maybe he's getting a little too much credit for the genius part. I mean, clearly, look, he might be like 98th percentile IQ or 98.5 or something, but IQ is a flawed concept. It describes certain types of intelligence very well and not emotional intelligence or things like that very well at all, right? So it's a very limited concept. And second, like, in a world of 8 billion people, there are lots of 98.5 percentile, book IQ people. In the poker world, you meet lots. So again, you meet lots of people with some of Sam's traits who didn't defraud investors out of $10 billion in deposits, basically.
So you think poker players would have been able to suss out SBS if...
I think a little bit.
Yeah.
I think a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, I think like, one thing that can be hard to turn off, but poker players, we are wired to spot flaws in people's stories, right?
Yeah.
And that is why there's this like kind of like very rare overlap a little bit between poker and journalism is like you're wired to be critical and spot flaws in people's stories. And that can be kind of hard to turn off, I think, in everyday life, right? Where you're inclined to kind of pick at things and pick at people and you kind of sometimes like see like a plus EV flaw in someone's thinking. You're like, I can't not point that out, which is like not that's just where I get in trouble on Twitter. It's like, you're making a bad argument here. And like, it's obviously a bad argument. Maybe I shouldn't say anything about it. Maybe I should collect some karma from like not, but it's like if you see EV sitting on the table, you're like, you just are not making that little min-click raise with a balanced range at all, right? I have an obligation to like make the exploitative play here, I think, right? But yeah.
Who do you think was the most interesting person you looked at for this book?
Some of the most interesting people, because they broke type a little bit, were people who are in this chapter about people who take physical risks. So for the most part, the book is about quantitative types, crypto and finance and Silicon Valley and poker, obviously, and things like that, right? Sports betting. I also talked to like a selection of people who like talked to like an ex-football player. I talked to an astronaut. I talked to an explorer. I talked to like a H.R. McMaster, who was a 5-star general. I talked to the woman who invented the COVID, or not COVID, but the mRNA vaccines, who like migrated from Europe with like, $100 like stuffed in a teddy bear to escape immigration authorities and things like that. Some people like taking like literal physical risks with their lives and like, so like Catherine Sullivan, for example, is an astronaut who I talked to. She was a fascinating person. She was like actually like studying oceanography of all things and applied to be an astronaut. And they were just like, this woman is so smart. It's, by the way, the first time she was in the Sally Ride cohort of astronauts, the first time that NASA accepted female astronauts.
Wow.
She was one of, I think, 5 or 6 women who were in that first inaugural class. And like, she's got a fucking PhD in oceanography. You have to be really fucking smart for NASA to say, out of 10,000 people, this oceanography woman, we're going to pick her because she's so level-headed and cool under pressure. But the thing was, like, I found that actually the physical risk takers and the poker players have more in common than you might think. The ability to like perform well under stress is another very important skill and another kind of very unique skill that you kind of get a simulated version of in poker.
Interesting.
But, if you are making a deep run in a big World Series event, or if you do play big cash games from time to time, and you have to, I'm going to go today and play some $1,100 tournament at the Wynn or something, right? And like,
Nice.
you know, the decision will like literally be 1/100th as important as when I made a deep run in the 5K, 18 players left the other day. And like, you have to, if you perform much worse in the $100,000 effective stack decision than the $500 tournament or whatever, then you're screwed. And like, so performing under pressure, preparation's a big part of it, right? I mean, there's kind of this stereotype. Talk to like a pilot who actually taught at the academy, sometimes called Top Gun. So if you watch Top Gun Maverick, then Tom Cruise, like, just wing it, trust your gut, right? Which is only true if your gut is very well trained based on having a lot of experience and practice and training and understanding, which is, I think, also very similar to poker. Like, poker is a case where, like, you get thousands and thousands of reps as a poker player. I played some hand at a poker go tournament against Daniel Negreanu a few weeks ago, and I had pocket twos. The flop was like Jack 10X, right? Decided to check back, kind of probably a mix or something, right? And then decided to like picked up a turn card I thought was good for my range, like a queen or something. Like, okay, I'm going to like actually try to like fold him off 10-8 offsuit or something with no redraws, and it might take a double barrel, but I'm going to go for it. And usually when you have like a solid plan for something, right? Like when you kind of like plan the bluff, I find you tend to give a little bit less away physically. And like against most players, like, this bluff's gonna work. It's a good bluff. I have a good range target, right? And like, he fucking calls me down, right? He like looks at me for like a minute and I felt like I wasn't giving anything away at all, right? Sometimes you kind of feel like you're twitching or whatever. Like, I felt he just fucking picked something up.
It's Negreanu.
Yeah.
He's gonna pick it up, whatever it is.
Yeah, and that experience of like having whatever 20, 30 years now playing poker in tough situations, he may not even have been able to like articulate why. He just something he just knew. He just knew. It's fascinating.
He's super instinctual, yeah. And so what was the trajectory of your poker career after 2006? You said that it kind of took away your livelihood. You transitioned and found FiveThirtyEight. Were you still playing poker at this time? When did you start playing live poker?
No, I pretty much stone cold quit for a period of time. Like, I would go and play, like, I played like the main event in like 2011 or something like that. I'd come out here maybe with the World Series and kind of play like maybe the main every second or third year, maybe some smaller events every second or third year. But I hadn't played much No Limit. I hadn't played much live poker. I hadn't played many MTTs. So I'm not sure. Maybe you're getting by to some extent with general poker instincts, but like, I'm not, I'm just a rec player basically. And then I don't know when. I think it was kind of like, maybe around 2017, 2018, post-Trump, kind of started picking it up a little bit more. Kind of had some people who are poker players kind of emerge into my life as friends a little bit more. Went down to some tournament at the Parks Casino. I live in New York, so Parks is in Salem or something, Pennsylvania, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of actually had a good experience. It was a one-day tournament. I finished like second out of like, so it's almost like a rebirth out of people often have like a big score. This was like not a bankroll thing. I had the bankroll to play the events I play, right? But like, oh, maybe I actually could get pretty good at the tournaments. And starting to kind of play tournament poker a little bit more before the pandemic, and then pandemic hits, and then there's not a lot to do. So having like a home game with friends, a Zoom home game with friends that went off every Thursday and Saturday called the Continental Free Poker Club, that featured a whole range of interesting personalities from the poker and kind of B-list celebrity world from New York. It's just like, this could be a separate like little mini documentary.
Yeah, that's an interesting game.
But that, and plus some of the gray market, shall we say, online sites. You got nothing to fucking do in the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So picking that up a lot, and then really getting more seriously into like the live poker when the pandemic faded, with the excuse partly of the book, but also, when you're in an environment, and it's very satisfying to do something where all of a sudden you're like enriched in an environment where you're gaining expertise, like, and getting better in a very tangible, like visible way, right? Like during the pandemic, one other thing I did is, because there's not much to do, is I would go like running a lot, right? And that, because I hadn't been, not that I'm in great shape, right? But you go from being in mediocre minus shape to mediocre plus, and you like kind of see like the trajectory in a very linear way. Like your times improve with like every run or every second or third run. And it felt that way in poker for a period of time where like between like summer 2021 and the World Series in summer 2023, just playing poker a lot. I mean, not quite the full tournament scene, but you might be playing like 40% of a pro schedule, enough that like you're just getting a lot of reps in, and like the live poker skills are improving a lot, the technical skills are improving a lot. Having like some poker background helps. And then since then I've had the book, I have an election, I have been playing a little bit more sporadically, but like I really like poker. I really like live poker in particular. I think it's a more information dense environment. I kind of play online poker because I'm bored, not always the best mentality. I play live poker because like I just like it. It kind of pushes my buttons for some reason. I have like a lot of friends now in the community at this point. And so, yeah.
What do you think is like the public perception of poker? It's definitely changed over the last decades, but have you experienced that in your career? Do people see you as a degenerate or stuff like that? How do you explain poker to people who don't understand it?
I mean, now and then they're like, "Oh, do you count cards?" I'm like, "No, it's the wrong game. It's not blackjack."
Yeah, we've all poker players have heard that, I'm sure.
My impression is that where you just said degen, my impression is that that's relatively rare, right?
Yeah.
That you've had, 20 plus years now of the moneymaker era where you see poker on TV enough, and you kind of like, there's enough in the background about AI and poker and kind of analytics in general, where I think people kind of, I'm not sure people see it like chess exactly, but I think actually the kind of lay public's understanding is probably pretty good. Also, I think with the kind of prominence increasingly of like sports betting, that seems to draw, maybe deservedly, like kind of more public skepticism and scrutiny, I think. I think poker has it's different than certainly 25 or 30 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely has changed. And you've really had no problem, it seems, keeping up with the game. You were grinding online in the early 2000s, and then now on the live circuit, a few years ago, you finished runner-up in the Limit Hold'em Championship, and then you had a deep run in the main event last year. You've already had some deep runs this year. How much has the game changed over the years, and how did you keep up with it?
I mean, look, technically it's improved a tremendous amount because of understanding solvers and computer-generated solutions, right? And just the number of people who are also other fields. Any field has become more analytics, from baseball to how McDonald's runs its restaurants and optimizes prices to make more money from its customers and things like that. But no, if you kind of took like an average pro, maybe even an average good rec player from today, and put her back like 30 years ago, just on technical skills alone, she would, I think, crush the games, even with poor soft skills, right, in most forms of poker. Now, with that said, like, maybe it's kind of optimal for someone like me, where I can like study in my spare time and study in very effective ways with all the training materials out there and the GTO programs and the coaching that's available. So maybe I can kind of keep up with the fact that other people are getting a few more reps in, although I do get like quite a few reps in myself. I think I also tend to, having just kind of more life experience in general is, I think, good for like kind of the softer poker skills, kind of empathizing with opponents and kind of seeing the situations that they've been in, being an observant person. I'm not super talkative at the table, kind of medium talkative, but I'm, in a higher stakes event, I'm watching maybe in ways that you're not expecting and picking up on things a fair bit. The fact that like when I play, it's always money I can afford to lose can make it seem like a free roll and put you, I think, in a really good mentality for the most part. So those are, I think I have like a good combination where like the technical skills are a 7.5 out of 10, and the soft skills are 7.5 out of 10. And I wish they were 10 out of 10, but like that's not realistic, given how many good players there are and given how much they play. But I think I have like a pretty well-rounded and adaptable skill set where I can adapt to moments. I think that comes out more in these deep runs a little bit, where people kind of flail under the pressure a little bit more, right? Certainly amateurs are more likely to give away live reads and things like that. Being able to remember how to execute on your ranges in those situations can be more challenging. And so I think those environments, especially the World Series, which, look, I'm not trying to advertise the World Series, but like they are like the softest tournaments in the world for their buy-in levels, right? Even the 5K, which is historically one of the tougher price points of the World Series, even the 5K, you had some real soft spots in the last several tables. And so I think those environments take advantage of my skills pretty well.
And staying on the 5K, you made a deep run in that, and probably an exit that you want to forget. You took a really brutal beat.
Yeah.
You had a set of fives against top two pair on the board of Jack 5-10 against Jack 10. It was all in on the flop, I think, and then he hits
Yeah, it's raise, fairly big check raise, shove, and he snap calls. It's, Jack 10-5 with a flush draw is a great flop for fast playing. We both saw the same thing, right? You have like lots of combo draws and things like that. Over pairs I'm trying to protect, right? So both players played it perfectly, and it's a 3.5 million chip pot, and he spikes a jack on the turn. There's no miracle 5 on the river. So it's very disappointing. I had a disappointing exit from the main, also on TV, where I had
all these televised final tables where
right?
You just take the worst beats. That's
but you
painful.
have to understand, like, okay, so how do I make it today to the final 18 players, right? Well, for one thing, on like day one, all in queens versus aces. I guess technically I'll cover the player, but 95% of my chips are at risk, and queens hit a queen on the flop and prevail, right? Late day two, all in tens versus aces. Both players play it perfectly. It's blind versus blind or button versus blind, right? Turn or river of flush, right? To beat aces to, again, almost double up, right? Also early on day two, I have aces against kings on a dry board in a 5-bet pot, right? Technically, I wasn't lucky there, but you're very lucky to have aces versus kings. Two clubs, we both have a club in our hand, right? The money's always going in there if everyone's playing it perfectly. So if you have I somehow won a three-way small all-in, but still meaningful three ways with ace-queen suited against ace-queen ace-queen suited against queen-queen and ace-king, which is very hard to do. I hit the flush, obviously.
Wow, I was trying to think how you can even win that one.
Yeah, so if you have 4 of those spots, then you can't complain when you take a 4-outer or whatever. It's just kind of the way it works, and the amount of concentrated continuous luck you need to actually win a tournament or make a final table. It's kind of insane. You have to keep winning coin flips over and over and over again, which are weighted differently. Sometimes they're 90% in your favor, 80% against you. But you can't I couldn't look at a tournament and say, I've just been unlucky the whole time, right? You just have to, look, the other good thing about that, by the way, is you never have any doubt about how you played, right? If you bust out the tournament by making some hero call, or heroic bluff, or I busted out of the shootout yesterday, got to heads up with two hands where, you have top pair on a dry board with a mediocre kicker and ran into overpairs both times, and you're kicking yourself, right? There's one hand where GTO says at 25 binds deep, you're doomed to get it all in with top pair on a dry board, right? In a raised pot. But you're kicking yourself endlessly. It's I think I could actually have made that fold to his click back min raise on the turn. Is he really ever having bluffs? And I don't beat any value, right? And so there you have many regrets. Whereas if you bust out set over set, or you get a bad beat where you're 9% to win, then you can go home and rest well at night, at least.
So it sounds like you're really just concerned about how well you play and, let the...
I think so. Look, I've been lucky enough in this kind of mini revitalized poker career where I've always had enough deep runs and big finishes where you kind of like sustain yourself, right? If I had a whole period of a year or something where it's just kind of striking out, then, but I don't, and I playing a little more high stakes cash and stuff like that too. So you have like just enough positive reinforcement where you don't get too down, I don't think.
Where are you playing high stakes cash? Here at the King's Lounge?
No, mostly maybe some private game type situations, or sometimes also in situations where, like if you want to invite me to your TV game, content providers, then I don't know, I like those environments. I think I can provide some entertainment value. So some of those too, some of the TV games. Yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely get invited to those TV games. Those would be entertaining for sure.
But having played between the combination of, having this half dozen really deep runs of different tournaments, plus having like a dozen-ish times playing high stakes either on TV or maybe in private game settings, like it does make the rest of it seem like riding a bike, right? You're used to playing for pots that are like 5 figures of real dollars or ICM value. It can be hard. I think sometimes the flip side of that. I mean, I think the concentration can lapse sometimes in lower stakes environments, and I've gotten in a weird spot where I feel sometimes more calm now in higher stakes settings, which is kind of feels perverse in some ways. And concentration can be a challenge. Like I've been out here for 2 weeks. I'm leaving to go home to New York this weekend, and then we'll come back for the main. But I'm playing some event at the Wynn where I learned that Donald Trump has been convicted on 34 felony charges, which I kind of have to write about, and
pull out the laptop by the table.
That's very distracting, right? I'm not sure I was playing all that well, right? I folded pocket kings to some reshove on a double paired board. Maybe it was okay actually, right? But I'm I was getting 5-1 there. I probably should have called, right? But whatever. But yeah, I mean, understanding playing poker well, where you're fully immersed in it, requires a lot of physical concentration too. After busting the 5K, a true degen, I entered the 25K, which I intended to play. I am pretty good about not just being I'm just going to play this 25K. That was on my list of events to play. I kind of I think it's not hugely plus EV, but I kind of budgeted out, right? So I meant to play that. I don't do that kind of thing all that often, right? So I have my 26K from 18th place.
Right there.
Yeah, free roll plus $1,000 back to spend on whatever, nice steak dinner. And that went fine, but I was buying in short and cards didn't cooperate. And then got dinner and a friend's let's get some drinks, we'll console you. And I just fucking almost passed out. I had to cancel it because I just to have a couple of deep runs in a row and then be playing this high stakes tournament. It's really and learning how to maintain your focus and find your reserves of energy. I mean, you are draining your battery a little bit. And so you kind of feel that once you emerge back into regular life where you don't have this stimulus of playing, $30,000 ICM pots or whatever.
Yeah. And going back to risk, so I think a lot, the main thing that stops people from taking risks is fear probably, or wanting that stability. And you've had a lot of different transitions in your career. When 2006 happened, you couldn't play poker anymore. You started FiveThirtyEight. You left FiveThirtyEight last year. You're now very active on Substack. You also have a podcast with Maria Konnikova, which is great, the Risky Business podcast. But how can people just kind of embrace the next step in their lives?
I mean, I found this lifestyle suits me way more than having just one big company I work for. Because your incentives are a lot better aligned, right? If you write a good newsletter post and get new subscribers, that kind of directly winds up being kind of money in your pocket. But no, having keeping a lot of doors open and having some robustness in your kind of approach, right? I kind of have 4 or 5 jobs. Right now I have a book and I have a newsletter and I have a podcast. I'm not sure I quite think of poker as a job. Maybe some of the some of the cash stuff is actually like where I do have some expectation of some long run income. I do some consulting work. So like, yeah, I mean, understanding that like of those ventures, if you're doing 5 things, then 2 or 3 of them can fail and you can focus on the 1 or 2. You know, having a lot of interest outside of poker and politics, right? I mean, I think I have like a supportive partner and good friends in New York and things like that. I just think it's important to like, I mean, optionality is really important where you are able to take advantage of good opportunities as they arise. Again, setting a high floor for in terms of like how you spend your time and where you invest your time and being willing to be patient. Like one role that I think poker plays for me a little bit is that like, you know, I can kind of ramp up or ramp down the amount of like time I'm spending like on the live poker scene. If I have a period of life where like there's not as much other work, I can do more of it, or I can do less. I mean, after the World Series, probably no live poker for me until the election, right? But like having, I don't know, just having more resources at your disposal and curating more options allows you to take upside risks that have less risk of ruin or less downside.
And so one of those projects you have going is the podcast with Maria. Maria is, you both have similar backgrounds. You're accomplished writers and journalists. She also has a psychology background, but are also really successful and accomplished poker players. How do you know Maria? How far does your relationship date back with her?
I mean, she's another person where I must have known her for 10 years. She's
Wow.
another person where we just have like a lot of friends in common, and like, you know, journalistic circles are already fairly small in New York, but journalists who are interested in like serious analytical, intellectual stuff like Maria is, and then her falling into kind of poker is, you know, even more serendipitous, I think. But we have like a lot of mutual friends in common, and I think it was like close to like 100% that we'd sooner or later become close friends. Yeah,
that makes sense. And so you have similar backgrounds, but also some differences. She has the psychology background. Yeah, how do you think you complement each other, and what do you learn from Maria?
I mean, so first of all, like kind of like, I mean, there are lots of kind of obvious and not so obvious things, right? I think to a certain extent, we fall into different like gender roles a little bit. She has a lot of experience of what it's like to be like a woman at the poker tables. That's very different from me, right? You know, she has kind of like a more rigorous kind of academic understanding. I tend to like fly by night a little bit more. I think she is like more reliable. I run like hot and cold a little bit more, which kind of, and ironic. I mean, that's kind of in terms of like the mood on the podcast. Like I'll come in like a little more emotional variability. It also kind of reflects in her poker results where we have like, let's say we make the same amount of money, but like she gets more cashes and I get more like deep runs, right? It kind of suits something, I think, in our personalities a little bit. You know, so we think in the Venn diagram, we're obviously quite similar. But I mean, journalism, I guess you're in this circle too. The journalism poker overlap is relatively narrow.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And the critical, and we both have, like I was saying before, this like very critical kind of suspicious eye, but like coupled with, I mean, Maria's like a really nice person and like a conscientious person. I don't know. I think I'm semi-nice and semi-conscientious. But, you know, but people who have like, we have like a lot of interesting life experience. You know, she migrated here from the Soviet Union, right? And I think that's reflected in this show, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I've listened to it and I'm really enjoying it so far. People should definitely listen to that. You guys talk about a lot of different things, not just poker. So yeah, definitely. Just a few general questions as we wrap up here that I like to ask people. So this will be a good one for you, just with how much you write about technology and things like AI, but what's something that makes you hopeful in the world? Not a lot of things.
No, I guess it's so trendy to be pessimistic now as a contrarian. I mean, look, I think human beings are remarkably resilient in some ways. I think in some ways, like COVID showed the resilience of human beings, where we found ways to make the best of a very bad situation. We found ways to get back to normal, even if normal means going to a poker tournament in Florida with plexiglass dividers and wearing masks and things like that. I think technology up to this point has improved. I mean, if you look at how many people in India are in poverty now versus 50 years ago, I mean, it's night and day, right? It was an extremely impoverished country. Now it's an increasingly middle-class country, and prosperity is being felt by more people around the world. So I do think like the kind of like pessimism of the political class is like empirically like actually miseducated. It's based on a lot of kind of misunderstanding, misinformation about like what the history of the world really looks like and how much kind of better the human condition now than it has been for a period of time. But like there are headwinds from like political turmoil to climate change to AI, right? It's a whole long rabbit hole potentially. But no, I think people, it's kind of like a little bit of like gut versus head. I mean, I think head says we should be pretty optimistic about the future of the world, and gut maybe says we shouldn't. But sometimes you shouldn't trust your gut necessarily.
That's interesting. All right, what is a piece of advice that you would give a younger version of yourself?
I don't know. I think a younger version of myself would be like,
you're doing great.
Fairly, and I don't know. Fairly. I mean, okay. Look, let me give actually some advice that I wouldn't give. I think I had some period of time, kind of in like the early FiveThirtyEight, especially like the kind of like FiveThirtyEight at ESPN, ABC News years, where I was just like too fully all in on work. Right. I mean, I think like intellectual work. First of all, like if you're saying if I'm working like 50 hours in a week, there's no like fake, because I make my own schedule, right? There's no like fake meetings in there. There's no kind of time where I'm in an office and not like actually working. Let's do like 40 or 50 hours of like really challenging work where you're working your brain is actually pretty hard. Or physical work, I'm sure too, where there's also like not a lot of idle time on a construction site or something, but like 50 hours of physical work or mental work where it's not fake work, where you're actually working that whole time. That's a lot. And so kind of burning yourself to the point where you're performing less well, where you're not taking care of your sleep or your health at all, where you're not maintaining friendships and relationship in your life at all, when you don't have kind of outside interests at all, like that's, I think, a pretty bad idea. I mean, I think if you have periods where for like a year or two, you really have to grind because you have a unique opportunity, then maybe for a year or two, like, 2008 or 2012, the election years are probably worth it. But I think I was like working too long hours for too long, where I wasn't working kind of smartly. Getting back into poker kind of in the mid-Trump years was part of having an outlet that's like something else to do. And so I would say, good job, Nate, in 2008, kind of burning the candle at both ends. But then, by the way, at Disney, I was just getting paid a fixed salary, right? There's no fucking incentive, like actually work as hard as I did for the Walt Disney Company for many years. I had pride on the line and things like that. But, I mean, the term like work-life balance doesn't quite suit me, right? Because like all the things that I most love in life kind of become jobs and vice versa at some point. But like, you can't spend all your time engaged in explicit work. It's not good for your work and it's not good for your life.
Yeah, great advice. Last question. So we've already talked about a lot of parallels between poker and other aspects of life, but what is your favorite life lesson that can be drawn from poker?
I mean, maybe there's something, don't be a nit is...
That's probably it right there.
Don't be a nit is a pretty good lesson, right? I mean, there's very nerdy stuff that comes from like studying GTO and things like that, right? I mean, like one thing I think is important is if you're a non-poker player listening to this by chance, then in game theory, you have a lot of spots where you're indifferent, which means that you've been put in a situation where either folding or calling, or either calling or raising is fine. They're both good plays. They have the same expected value, and you shouldn't sweat it too much, right? I think people spend way too much time on spots where they're indifferent, where you should just like literally flip a coin, right? I'm going to get lunch after this. Do I want to get like tacos or I don't know, spaghetti or something, right? I know I'm saying tacos are Italian food, right? Just flip a fucking coin. It doesn't matter, right? They're both good. People agonize over these decisions that are very marginal and then kind of are very flip about making decisions that are big career, relationship, life planning decisions that are much higher stakes and where it is worth spending more time trying to figure out, like, is this alternative? I'm not someone who's like with a spreadsheet trying to calculate these things out, but you know, do most things point in one direction for a really big career switching decision? I think that's worth spending a lot of time on and being more rigorous about, whereas like where to eat your next lunch is not very important.
Yeah, I think people could save time and energy by randomizing a lot of those decisions. That would be a good lesson.
My partner gets furious when I like, I'd be like, let's flip a coin. And that's something that's like reveals your true underlying preference. You're like, fuck it, I want tacos today, right? I wanted tacos all along. I just had to flip a coin to confirm that like that was my real preference, basically.
Yeah, that's great advice, and it'll save people time. Well, Nate, this has been great. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, Connor.